Welcome everyone to this virtual presentation about combining peer evaluation and Zoom breakout rooms in a hybrid class environment. My name is Jan Zentinga, and I am an instructor at the Terry College of Business at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. First of all, a little bit about my background. I teach project management both at the BBA and the MBA level. I also teach service operations management both at the MBA and the BBA level. And finally, I teach supply chain analytics. My research interests are as follows. I'm very interested in things like project management, case studies, as well as teaching methodologies. Prior to joining the faculty here at the University of Georgia, I was actually an implementation manager at a software company, and I was also a consultant and a manager at a Big Four consulting company for many years. So here's today's agenda about what it is that we're going to be discussing. First, I want to give a little bit of background about what happened with the University of Georgia, as well as a number of other universities, I guess, in this whole pandemic situation, and how the use of the software called Zoom was impacting that. Then I'm going to go more into some specifics about the use specifically of breakout rooms within Zoom. And we're going to talk here about how can we set up random breakout rooms, but also how can we set up pre-assigned breakout rooms. What would be the functionality? What are some of the scenarios that we can use this for in a university setting? Next, we're going to look at how this fits in with the rest of the classroom. And specifically, I'm going to see about how this works within the whole concept of peer evaluations and group evaluations. So I'm going to see how this can fit in within yet another software where we can do submissions of, say, PowerPoint presentations or Word documents or any other type of documentation, how we can set up the peer review within this context, and finally, what does it mean for the grading, both from the student perspective as well as the instructor perspective. And I would like to close out with some next steps and some things to be careful with if you were to apply this type of methodology and this type of process. So let us first start out then by thinking about Zoom and breakout rooms a little bit. It is quite interesting to me if I look back for about a year or so last fall, very, very few people had actually known or used this software called Zoom. And so it has been seemingly overnight that Zoom has become a dominant force, especially in higher education instruction. Things like universities, even high schools, etc. Almost everybody seems to be using this software straight away. And from a software perspective, as I talked earlier, I have a software background. There has been quite a few changes there where on the one hand, Zoom is trying to put in as much functionality as possible, as quickly as possible, to make sure that all of these new constituencies are being satisfied. So there's a lot of new things coming into Zoom all the time. At the same time, the amount of additional people that have come onto the system is absolutely staggering. So then the big question there is, how well do people actually know this functionality? How well do the students know the ins and outs of Zoom, and what learning curve do they have in order to know that they use the software in the appropriate fashion? And that is actually the same way for administrators. It is not only the students, it is also the people at the higher education institutes, people that work in the IT staff, that all of a sudden get this enormous amount of people that are on Zoom, and it is an enormous learning curve for them as well. And then finally, it's a learning curve for us as instructors to say, how can I actually use the functionality that I have of this new software that we almost have to use because we don't really have a choice, because of the pandemic? How can I best use this software to still make a successful course, have a successful lesson plan, successfully give instructions of a particular set of content to my students? So these are all kinds of questions that we have to think of. And part of what we need to do then is think about how does Zoom work within what we regularly have done and would like to continue doing within our situation. As we talked about earlier, the pandemic has made drastic changes to the classrooms. It used to be that in the classroom, I had breakouts within my classroom where I would have a couple of people in one corner of a room talk about a particular subject, give presentations to each other. And there would be people in another corner of a room doing the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. So I would have a number of different breakout rooms inside my class. Right now, because of social distancing, I can no longer do that. I am not allowed to have these people close together in a breakout room less than 6 feet apart. So this is not a solution. On the other hand, I have a lot of people that are on Zoom already. They are not even physically in the classroom, but they still want to participate within this process. So the question is, how does that work? If we look back at Zoom, there are actually two different ways that we can work the breakout rooms. There's what's called random breakout rooms in Zoom, and there are also pre-assigned breakout rooms in Zoom. So it looks like there is some functionality that we can use to mimic what we have already been doing in the class. The question is, how can we mimic that? And what are the kinds of things that we need to change in order to make sure that the experience of the students in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom is still sufficient to learn the objectives that I have set out. And part of the objectives then is I want my students to do peer evaluations. I don't want my students to sit in a breakout room and talk about random topics. That is not what I do in the classroom. What I do in the classroom is I want my students to have a PowerPoint presentation that they present to other people in the classroom. Then I want some people that are sitting right next to the students to give feedback about this particular PowerPoint presentation. And finally, I want some grading to take place. I want this to be a serious part of a course that I'm teaching, which means that I'm going to be grading the students on how they did on the presentation. And I also want to be grading the students on how they did on the peer review. So I want to do both. So and the question then is, how do I make that happen? So the next part then is to see what is the preparation that I need to do. As we talked about earlier, Zoom actually offers the functionality for breakout rooms. The more common functionality that I have noticed is to divide the class into random groups. This is actually fairly simple within Zoom, where you go onto the breakout room icon that you see here with a little red arrow. You click on that one and Zoom tells you, well, there's 50 people in the class. How many breakout rooms do you want to have? And I say, well, I want to have 8 breakout rooms. And Zoom will then calculate how many people per breakout room and which people will go into each breakout room. And that is perfectly acceptable for a number of different objectives, teaching objectives. Unfortunately, there are a number of teaching objectives, like the one that I just talked about, where this is not appropriate because I want to have 2 people in a specific breakout room that are going to present something, and I want to have 2 other people in that same breakout room that are going to review the PowerPoint presentation. So I cannot do that randomly. Otherwise, I could possibly end up with a breakout room where nobody is presenting, or a breakout room where I only have presenters but no reviewers. So that would not work that way. So that means that I have to do some additional planning. I have to create pre-assigned groups, they're called in Zoom. Unfortunately, because of what we talked about earlier, this is not a very intuitive process. There are multiple steps involved in this process to create these pre-assigned groups. So let us look at what are the steps that are involved. The first thing that we have to be aware of is that every single participant in the class, every single participant that is in the Zoom meeting needs to have a Zoom account. You cannot just log into a Zoom account, which you can do in the normal Zoom, but not with this one, not if you want to have pre-assigned breakout rooms. The second part is that all the participants need to relay their email address they used to set up that particular Zoom account to their instructor. Yeah. So some of the participants had already set up a Zoom account using their Gmail address, which is valid, but they will have to let me know that that is the Zoom account that they are logging in with. Some other participants use their standard UGA email address. And so they had to email me what that looked like. Some other participants had some other email address also within the university system. They had to email me that one. So I ended up with a number of different types of email addresses that I had to receive from all of the participants in order to make this process work. So it is only once I had received all of these Zoom accounts and Zoom account email addresses specifically that I then could go to the next step to pre-assign all of these email addresses into my breakout rooms in Zoom. So the next step then is I have to go to Zoom, and there's a functionality that you see at the bottom part here where you have to say, create these pre-assigned rooms. You can do this through a CSV file. It's called a flat file, or it's some type of a spreadsheet basically with pre-formatted functions. Or you can go in one by one and type in every single room and every single email address. And you already see that this is, first of all, a lot of work, and there's a lot of room for error to type in 20, 30, 40, 50 different email addresses. In principle, you don't want to do that. So you need to go the route of the flat file. That would be my recommendation. So this is what a flat file would look like. So this is a sample where you say in room 1, I'm going to put this person. In room 2, I'm going to put this person. Also in room 2, I'm going to put this person. And this way, I am going to set this up on a spreadsheet somewhere for every single person in my room. So it's basically copy and pasting it from different spreadsheets. And for instance, in this particular case, I'm going to have these 2 people in room 2 and these 2 people in room 1. These may be the presenters for room 1 and the presenters for room 2. And then later on, I have to add more people, which is my reviewers that I have to add to room 1 and my reviewers that I have to add to room 2. So there's more work to be done. In total, for my classes of 30, 40, 50, 60 people, I would have a list of 60 people. Then I would have to put this one in. And here is a tricky part because I actually use what's called recurring meetings in Zoom. A recurring meeting means that for my course, I have set up the same meeting for the entire semester. And even though this is blue and it says edit this occurrence, that will actually not work. You have to edit, as of now, it may change because again, Zoom is working very hard to increase the functionality, and I really appreciate them doing that. But for now, you have to click on edit all occurrences. That would be the only way for now that I have seen to make this work. It may very well change in the future. I would recommend that you try both ways and see if it works. So once you have done that, you will then have to go and set up your peer evaluations. So now we go to a different software. And that software that I use is called PeerDoc. This is a software, incidentally, that I have used for a number of semesters, both outside and inside of Zoom. And here's how that works. So basically, I manage the whole process of the software where all of the groups, the 4 people per group, I set up inside the PeerDoc software. So the PeerDoc software drives the 4-person group, and then I take 2 people from one group and put them in as reviewers in Zoom, and 2 people from that group, I put them in reviewers in Zoom as well. So that is a decision that I have to make based on what's on the software. So once I do that, my students will then create their PowerPoint presentation still before the class, or they will be creating their Word document or whatever it is that they're going to be presenting. So that's all done before the class. Then at that point in time, during the class, I am going to open up the pre-assigned rooms, and I'm going to give it a time limit. Usually I do about 20 minutes or so. So I go to set up the pre-assigned rooms, I assign all my students to my pre-assigned rooms, and I open up all the rooms, and I say, all of the people that are in the classroom, please go to your pre-assigned rooms. And previously, I had already given them the role as well. If you are in group 1 and you have to go to room 1, you are the presenter. If you are from team 2 and you go to room 1, then you are the reviewer. Yeah, so both the presenters and reviewers go to the pre-assigned rooms. So normally I have anywhere between 10, 20, maybe 30 pre-assigned rooms. So once everybody is in the room, they are no longer in the main room in Zoom, they are in their breakout rooms. So the presenters then start sharing their screen in Zoom, and they start with their presentation. At the same time, the reviewers will open up the PeerDoc application, and they will start evaluating the presentation. And they will do that using the supplied rubrics and free-form text boxes. So again, this is something that I, as the instructor, have planned beforehand. And as the instructor, I generally remain in the main room in case everything goes wrong. Maybe sometimes somebody goes out of their room, goes into the main room to ask me a question, or I can visit the breakout rooms. So I can go to multiple different breakout rooms, kind of see that everybody is on point, that they are doing the presentation, that there are questions and answers, where they are in the presentation, etc. So I, at that point in time, do basically a virtual walk around in all of the different breakout rooms in Zoom. And at the same time then, this is what the reviewers do. So the reviewers see a rubric like this, and they listen to the presentation. And they say, well, in terms of the organization, I think the organization is good, and they click on good. I think the content is okay, but not fantastic, so I'm going to call that one fair. I think the presentation itself, the eye contact, the clear audible voice, the voiceover, language skills, I'm going to give that an excellent. And then underneath, the students then have the opportunity to type in additional comments. The students don't necessarily know this, but behind the scenes, this actually creates a suggested grade, a first part of a suggested grade. So that finishes up the presentation part. So after the 20 minutes, everybody has finished up their presentation in their breakout rooms, in their pre-assigned rooms. So once the presentation has finished and the reviewers have given their feedback, all the students return to the main room in Zoom. And at that point in time, I go back to the other software, the PeerDoc software, and I go to the next stage. At this stage, they are going to evaluate the other 3 members of their group to say, how well did we work together in creating this presentation? And all the members also complete a self-evaluation here. So basically they say, how well did I do? So let us look at an example of what the evaluation looks like. This is what the question will look like. So the question would be, was Joe Smith a valuable member of our team in creating this entire PowerPoint presentation and doing the presentation? And you can say, yes, I agree with that statement, or I strongly disagree with that statement because Joe Smith didn't do anything for the presentation. It was just the three of us that did all the work. And then you can add some comments to that. Yeah, so this will give feedback to the instructor and the instructor only on how the dynamics of the team worked within this presentation that was happening on Zoom. And as you can see, this can be done either inside the classroom or outside the classroom. It is a completely hybrid approach to giving presentations and giving each other peer evaluations. The next part then is after the class. So after the class, what we do is, as an instructor, we open up the PeerDoc gradebook. And the PeerDoc gradebook then gives all of the comments and all of the scores from all of the reviewers. Additionally, the gradebook will give a suggested score based on the group evaluation, and it will give the text from the self-evaluation. So at this point in time, the instructor, even though the instructor may not have been physically present at all of the breakout rooms, it's almost impossible because these are breakout rooms in Zoom and I cannot be in 10 breakout rooms at the same time, but I can see the results of all of what the presenters did and all of what the reviewers did and the results of how the group evaluated each other. That then creates a suggested grade. The instructor then can either accept that grade or I can override the grade. I can look at the PowerPoint presentation, I can look at all the evaluations and I say, given what I'm seeing here, the suggested grade from the students is an 87.5, but I really think they did better than that. I am going to give it a 90, and I'm going to give some comments as to why this particular group receives a grade of a 90 rather than an 87.5 or a 95. So the final grade is still always in the hand of the instructor. And I think that's a key point of this process. Yes, we use Zoom, yes, we use PeerDoc, but it is always the instructor that makes the final decision. So here's then what the PeerDoc instructor sees. Yes, so the instructor sees all of the groups, sees if all the file submissions have been done, sees if all the group evaluations have been done. The instructor can then double click on each group to see the details of each of the groups. Then the instructor clicks and say, I accept all the grades and I publish all the grades. So at that point in time, the entire process is done the same way that an instructor has done the process for any PowerPoint presentation in class or outside of class. So it is essentially the same process. And the next part is, of course, that this published grade can then be moved into the gradebook in the learning management system from your university. So the last part then is, let us look at some next step and discussions, and then I will open up the floor for questions. The first thing is that the good news is that the methodology has been used very successfully in multiple classes. I myself am using this particular methodology in about 3 different classes. There are some other instructors I'm aware of as well. They use a very, very similar methodology where we do a combination of Zoom and the peer evaluation, some type of evaluations. And so also the good news is that it can be used in any combination of face-to-face and Zoom students. The only thing, again, is that all of the students have to be on Zoom. They have to be logged into Zoom. So the interesting part is that even though a student is physically in the class, They still bring their laptop, they still log into Zoom for this process. And yes, it is tech heavy. You see that I'm using two different pieces of software, pretty much in combination of each other. The good news is that I have seen that the student feedback is actually favorable for this. They seem to be able to accept that this is the new normal. Using Zoom is the new thing that we need to be using. And if we are on Zoom, then we have to find other ways to do these types of presentations, to do these types of reviews. And so we have to use other parts of software for that. Zoom doesn't have this kind of peer evaluation software, so they are okay with using something else. And let's look at some experiences and pitfalls then. I think the main thing, the main message for the instructors as well as the students is that preparation is key. There is much more preparation here than in a regular preparation inside the classroom. And some examples are that all of the students must have a valid Zoom account. They must give the appropriate email address to the instructor. If you have multiple Zoom sessions, say you give the same class every Tuesday or Thursday, you have additional issues because Zoom does not allow an individual session in a range of sessions to be changed. You have to change all of them. And finally, there's a lot of planning from both the instructor as well as the presenters, as well as the reviewers, all the students really, to plan in advance what is going to happen. If you are absent for whatever reason, and there are always very good reasons to be absent, you have to reconvey this information to the instructor in advance so that the instructor can change the Zoom breakout rooms and all of the work in advance of the class. Once you are in the classroom, it becomes much harder to do that. So with that, I would like to finish up here, and I would like to open up the floor for questions.